I'd like to start by just, first of all, maybe allowing you to introduce Arena Bioworks, which is a biotech right here in Cambridge. Sure. Maybe you could share a little bit about Arena, what the vision is, what the mission of the company is, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. First of all, it's been a great pleasure working with you, Alexander, and your colleagues. I hope we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And
congratulations. So happy to say a word about Arena Bioworks. We are a human biology-based center whose mission is to understand the mechanism of disease in the context of human physiology, and to translate those insights into new medicines through the formation of biotech companies within Arena. Now, we're able to do that because we are privately funded, and so we study disease and translate the medicines, we say, under one roof. And if anyone has seen our logo, you'll see the little roof. And so private funding turned out to be important.
Amazing.
Can I say, on the way in, I heard Steve Pagliuca mention.
Yes.
It really helps when you may all be surprised Steve has intersected yet once again. We have an amazing group of visionary investors, and Steve is one of them. He's actually our executive chair. But their alignment with the scientists of tackling big unmet medical needs and pulling in modern technology to get there as quickly as possible is kind of the magic of Arena.
Amazing. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the fascinating things about the biotech field, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit, is how multidisciplinary it is. And I think the ability for AI, and Gen AI in particular, to really start to accelerate a lot of the initiatives that you have going on and the problems that the company is tackling is really transformational. Maybe you could share a little bit about the problems, because I think, as you said, it starts with those, but also your vision for how Gen AI fits into this space.
Sure, Alexander. Let me pick one or two examples. Actually, I'll pick two, and I'll pick one that happens to be what we've been working on together in our collaboration, our partnership. But I also want to share one that I think is going to be a little bit more challenging, maybe take a little bit more time, but ultimately will have tremendous impact on human health. So the first one, actually, I think it was Alexander, in your presentation, you talked about designing proteins, and we all know it's kind of amazing what generative AI has done in predicting protein structure and designing protein structure. That doesn't mean all the problems have been solved. And one of the ones that we've been tackling jointly is that these beautiful structures we see in designed proteins are largely static. Now, we know that in the body, proteins move around, they're highly dynamic, and we know that it's essential for their function. You know, when a protein enzyme catalyzes a reaction, there's all kinds of side chain motions that are critical along that lowering the overall energy of the potential energy curve of this reaction. When a drug binds a protein, it's rare that the pre-organized structure of the drug and the pre-organized structure of the protein simply fit together by lock and key. And yet, that is where we are today. It's largely these structures that we create are static. I'm optimistic that this is a problem that we can solve. I think there's a lot of different approaches, and we've focused on one. I'll point to my personal experience in the early 1990s when I met Martin Karplus. And Martin, who's a giant in the field, came to me and actually talked about the same question of dynamic properties of proteins. And I remember in his case, he wanted to integrate what was called molecular mechanics and quantum mechanics. And his work was recognized in a Nobel Prize years later. And it really put on the map that proteins are highly dynamic, and there are ways to compute those dynamic. It's very limited in what you can do. But I think this is the time to rethink that problem from a generative AI perspective, and couldn't be more excited about doing this jointly with Liquid.
Absolutely. I think actually, so one of the things that you mentioned that got me really excited originally was that this vision that you just described is very true to the original vision of Liquid as well. The world is not static in these snapshots. The world is liquid, it's it's adapting, it's changing, it's dynamic over time, and that's actually the roots of the architecture that we had built in the very beginning days. So I think it's a perfect problem statement. I also want to tie that into something that you and I were talking about backstage, which is the importance of basically problem-first thinking.
Yes.
Because this is also something that we hold very dearly in the company, that we see a lot of AI companies out in the world really based on hype that go after just new types of technology for the sake of building new technologies, and then plug and play into existing problems that without innovating on the problem itself. Could you speak a little bit about, from your point of view, especially in a field like biotechnology, the importance of problem-first thinking?
Yes, I'm very happy to. I was listening to these talks. It was very, very interesting, but I confess that I feel very strongly about the notion in biomedicine, in the human body, it's exceedingly complex, and it really helps to start with the problem, to know what is the problem we're trying to solve, because the alternative of creating massive data using generative AI will very likely provide useful insights, but not necessarily to solve the problem you care about. I said I was going to give a second example. I'll try to tie this in. I'm going to sort of make up a little things as I go along to try to illustrate the concept. But I think that the human body, as I said, very complex. There's a lot of things we could measure. Happily, there are things today, and we at Arena are working very hard with partnering, including with sovereign nations, to have access to large number of participants, large number of samples from the body longitudinally. But still, what are you going to do with all of this? So I'll give you an example of the human brain because it feels appropriate with Liquid. We have major unmet medical needs in neuropsychiatric disease, neurodegenerative disease. It feels like some progress is being made. We read about new medicines. But those of us who study this really carefully, I think the lack of progress is more notable for the substantive progress. And so I think, if we tackle those problems and start with the fundamentals, like what is a brain? What is it composed of? And I think one of the things, we all intrinsically know our brain is kind of squishy. I think I heard a reference to that with the Liquid model. There's a reason for it. It's a sack full of what we call lipids in biochemistry. Yes. And these lipids are very dynamic, and they're changing. And I think that if we focused in on neuropsychiatric schizophrenia or neurodegenerative Alzheimer's, and got away from the biases of what we think is going on. In Alzheimer's, we know that there are these amyloid deposits, but are they causal, or are they a correlate? And just take a step back, gather the relevant data and the relevant generative AI, I strongly suspect that whole new concepts will emerge, and they will provide a blueprint for new directions in creating the medicines we so desperately need. So I picked it as a kind of hypothetical. It's not entirely hypothetical. We are doing work in this area, and what I've outlined is sort of a summary of what we've seen thus far.
Amazing. I mean, especially just building off of that, this loop of basically sensing and actuating, right? We want to sense the body, but then actually build back and act on it and build new things that we would want to sense from that loop is a very iterative process that I think it really also comes at the core of the mission of Liquid. So maybe I just want to end on one more question, because
Sure.
You mentioned earlier that Arena and Liquid will be partnering
Yes.
in this space of biotechnology and Gen AI at the intersection of the two. Maybe just a quick comment for the audience on why you believe this relationship is so important for you and for the field.
Yes, Alexander, it's a really great question, and it's another thing that, listening to the conversations, that keeps coming back to me. You know, we looked at a lot of groups in this area, and to be honest, many of them sort of felt familiar, because, you know, I think we at Arena, we have basic knowledge of what generative AI can do, machine learning can do, neural nets can, what the contributions. And we found a lot of sort of like-minded people, and we would debate one problem over another. I think with liquid, we found two groups that have deep domain knowledge, one in medicine, the other in generative AI. And so we had to work hard to get across the language barrier, but we were all super excited about the fact that this was potently synergistic and not, you know, redundant in any way. So I think the deep domain knowledge and expertise of liquid, and an interest in listening to us think about some of the big unmet medical needs was kind of magical.
Absolutely. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, everyone.